Good morning. Welcome to King's Report News Hour. We're in the 16th year of Changgi, the leap sixth month, and the 9th day of that month by the heavenly calendar. Tim Elder sitting in for the second king of Tenerife land. I'd like to get through this leap month as quickly as possible, but we have exactly 3 weeks remaining in this month. Okay. The first day of the 7th month will be 3 weeks from today, the 23rd. Yes. All right, let's go see what's going on around the kingdom right now. In Chongpyeong, Tennessee, 66 degrees and partly sunny today, high of 75. Yes. Chongpyeong having a nice day, it looks like. Intervals of clouds and sunshine with a couple of thunderstorms, humid. And then a low tonight of 66, cloudy most of the time with a thunderstorm in parts of the area. Father's hometown, Cheongju, North Pyongan province, and what is today North Korea. 86 degrees right now, mostly clear, getting down to 72 tonight. Turning cloudy and humid, a thunderstorm in spots late. Tomorrow, high of 83. Morning thunderstorm, otherwise cloudy and humid. And then, wow, in Tony Palace in Northeast Pennsylvania this morning, 55 degrees. We're in the 50s. Wow, Pennsylvania. And a high, sunny, by the way, and a high of 78 today, less humid with plenty of sun. A beautiful start to the weekend. Tonight, clear and cool, low of 50. Wow, we're going to be in the 40s pretty soon. And then, if current trend continues, and I guess current trends, of course, never continue. All right, let's see here. At the Liberty Rock RV Park and Campground in Limestone County, Texas, some sun then turning cloudy with a thunderstorm in parts of the area, humid, and a high of 93 today. Tonight, partly cloudy and humid, low of 73. And the Suncheon Palace, right now, 83 degrees with some clouds, cloudy and warm and humid at 79 degrees for a low. And then tomorrow, high of 87, cloudy and periods of rain and a thunderstorm in the afternoon. At the Gunma Palaces in Japan, boy, my goodness, currently 92 degrees and just ending, the rain is just ending, I believe. And they mainly clear and uncomfortably humid tonight, 76 for a low, 96 for a high tomorrow, mostly sunny and humid. Caution advised if outside for extended periods. And then in Ilan, Taiwan, the Republic of China, it is currently 85 degrees and overcast, getting down to 80 degrees tonight. Tomorrow, mostly cloudy and a high of 94. All right, so Suncheon Palace, 87. So I guess the Gunma Palaces are the hottest place in the kingdom this morning. Okay, and let's go to the Father's Word. And Father is speaking to a Japanese audience here. I think it's pretty clear. This is September 29th, 1965. Okay. And this is the book on the Pan-Pacific Providence, Chapter 4, Section 3, and about a page into Section 3. The Section 3 subtitle is Japan's Mission as the Eve Country. Okay, that's the title there. And let's see here. So, you must become the 주인공. 주인공 is a protagonist or main actor. If you have a movie or a drama, you have the main character, right? You have the main character. And we don't use that word main actor or main character outside of movies or dramas, but father would sometimes use it, and he's using it here. So basically, he's saying you have to become the main character, the main actor in the most difficult place in Tokyo. And that's why I say he's obviously talking to a Japanese audience, but this applies universally. Whatever country you're in, whatever city you're in, whatever metropolitan area you're in, this will apply to you. You must become the main character, taking responsibility for the most difficult place in Tokyo. Also, also, you must stand in the most difficult position within the Japanese Unification Church and take responsibility for the most difficult job. Otherwise, Japan will be placed in the most difficult position as a country, Now, like I said, this applies to every country and to whatever place we are in. And, many of our countries are in difficult positions right now. United States, of course, and European countries, of course, and Australia and other countries. We're really in the sort of final stages of the struggle of ideology between God's ideology or Godism and communism. And so I think Father is speaking to us in that context. Right, let's go and see what has happened. And speaking of being in the difficult position, yesterday we had this story about Russia's former President Medvedev sort of threatening the United States or threatening the West in general with nuclear weapons if Trump doesn't back down on his tariffs against Russia or his sanctions against Russia. Now, apparently Medvedev is a heavy drinker, and apparently he makes these sort of online posts after he's well lubricated, so to speak. So I think a lot of people would have preferred that President Trump sort of take it in stride. And, okay, well, because a lot of countries threaten the United States all the time, right? I mean, North Korea. I mean, they've got a whole team of people who come up with various creative names to come up with all sorts of creative ways to threaten the United States, come up with creative names for the United States and so forth and so on. And it doesn't even make the news in America. But President Trump reacted to that, and he reacted to it by moving a couple of U.S. Submarines closer to Russia. And so basically, this is an escalation. Okay, Medvedev started. Okay, yeah, but he's probably drunk, or he may be drunk. He may be drunk. I don't know. Maybe President Trump has other intelligence that we don't have. That's quite possible. But anyway, moving U.S. submarines, armed with nuclear missiles, moving them closer to Russia is an escalation of his threat against Russia. And it is it does move the world closer to that point where nuclear weapons will be used again for the first time in, now almost 80 years. I think this week or next week actually will be the anniversary of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, 80th anniversary. And I think it's really, it's only by the grace of God that we have not had nuclear weapons used in a war type situation since then. And that streak is likely to be broken at some point. And well, President Trump has moved us closer to that point. So I'm a little bit worried about this. But of course, I know what he's doing. He's escalating in order to de-escalate. He's he understands it's important that the war in Ukraine be wound down so that the United States can focus on Taiwan and China, Taiwan, Korean Peninsula, the South China Sea, everything having to do with China there. But anyway, let's take a look at what's going on with this. Let's go to the Newsmax story. And actually, President Trump had an interview with Newsmax, and he spoke about this with Newsmax directly. So let's take a look at what he said. President Donald Trump called out the fresh mouth of a Russian official for invoking the ultimate threat of nuclear weapons, telling Newsmax on Friday that as a result, he ordered 2 nuclear submarines closer to Russia. In an exclusive interview with Finnerty host Rob Finnerty at the White House, Trump said his eyes lit up. His eyes light up. His eyes light up when nuclear weapons are mentioned, in this case by Dmitry Medvedev, deputy chair of the Security Council of Russia, and also former president of Russia. Well, a former president of Russia who's now in charge of one of the most important councils, Medvedev, said some things that were very bad, talking about nuclear. And when you mention the word nuclear, my eyes light up and I say, we better be careful because it's the ultimate threat, Trump said. And maybe people in Russia are, when I say people in Russia, I'm talking about Putin and the people around Putin. Maybe they are a little bit upset with Medvedev, or maybe he was speaking for them. Maybe they assigned him the task of doing this. Because if Putin had said this, it would be something else entirely. But Medvedev, at least he's not the president. He's a former president. He is, of course, now the deputy chair of the Security Council of Russia. But he's a person who can be sort of blamed for sort of speaking out of turn, and Russia can say, oh yeah, we didn't mean that, at least not entirely. But so we don't know really what was Medvedev doing? What was was this something off the cuff, like some people are saying, just a drunken post? Or was this intentional on the part of the Putin team? We don't really know. At least you and I don't know. Medvedev, in a post on Telegram Thursday, cautioned Trump to keep in mind his favorite films about the Walking Dead and referred to the Soviet Union's system for launching a last-ditch automatic nuclear strike. He shouldn't have said it. This is Trump now. He's got a fresh mouth. He said things in the past too, and so we always want to be ready. It's why I've sent to the region 2 nuclear submarines. I just want to make sure that his words are only words and nothing more than that, Trump said. He was asked if the submarines are closer to Russia. They're closer to Russia, yeah, they're closer to Russia, Trump answered. Trump continued to decry the terrible situation of Russia's war in Ukraine. This is Biden's war, former President Joe Biden, because you know who Biden is. This is not my war. This war would have never happened. It didn't happen for 4 years. It was never even talked about other than anything I had conversations with Russian President Vladimir Putin, Trump said. It was the apple of his eye, but he wasn't going to go into Ukraine. And I will say this, that's a war that should end. That's a terrible war. Trump's new deadline on Russia to broker a ceasefire with Russia is August 8th, which is a week from yesterday. A week from yesterday. Okay. He said that if a deal is not in place, we'll put sanctions on, and he's pretty good with sanctions. He knows how to avoid sanctions. Trump came into the presidency with a top goal of ending the war, which he thought he had nailed down with Putin 3 different times. So President Trump is saying he's going to put sanctions in effect, but then he's also, in the next sentence, saying that, well, he's pretty good with sanctions. In other words, he doesn't expect that the sanctions are going to be effective in pressuring Putin to stop the war. So what's the next step then? What's the next step if sanctions are not going to work? The war, okay, on the one hand, yes, it's distracting the United States from China. That is true. But on the other hand, it's let's look at it from North Korea's point of view and the point of view of potentially unifying the Korean Peninsula someday. On the one hand, the war is giving North Korean military very valuable combat experience. And we already had one article a week or so ago saying that the North Korean military has been upgraded considerably as a result of their participation in the Ukrainian war, because they've had a chance to test their tactics and also their weapons. So they're now a much better military than they were before. On the other hand, a lot of North Korean troops are being killed in the war. And a lot of North Korea's armaments are also being destroyed in the war. Although North Korea, I think, has sort of ramped up its armament production capability. But it is, a long war has to, have a pretty big impact on the national treasure. And North Korea doesn't have a treasure to speak of in the first place. So it's hard to say. It's hard to say. I guess we just have to pray that may God's will be done. We would like for the killing to stop in the Ukraine. We certainly would. And I've even said that if push comes to shove, maybe Trump should just abandon Ukraine so as to be able to focus on China, even to take that step. But, I guess we have to take a step back and say, well, wait a second, maybe we don't know what is best for God's will in this situation. And it would seem that an early end to the war, as Trump said, this war never should have happened, never would have happened. But now that it's going on, was God did not cause this war, that's for sure. But now that it's going on, is this something that God can use somehow? Is this something that he's able to use? I don't know. Anyway, let's just pray that his will be done. Okay. I talked to Putin a lot. I think we had a great conversation. Then I go home and I see that a bomb was dropped in Kiev and some of the various cities killing people. I say, I just had this great conversation with him and it looked like we were going to. I thought we had it worked out 3 different times. And maybe he wants to try and take the whole thing. I think it's going to be very hard for him, he said. One person calculated that at the current rate of the way that Russia is acquiring territory in Ukraine, it's going to take them more than 70 years to capture the entire country. I don't know. Trump was asked if his opinion of Putin has changed over the past few months. He's obviously a tough cookie, so it hasn't changed in that way. But I'm surprised. We had numerous good conversations where we could have ended this thing. And all of a sudden, bombs start flying, Trump said. Okay, so I guess that's okay. Yeah, okay. So President Trump talking about his relationship with Putin and about the Ukraine war there with Newsmax, an interview with Newsmax. Okay. And also in related stories, I think from the same interview, Trump said that Hillary and Obama should pay for Russiagate hoax. That would be nice, yes. He could maybe put a surtax on their assets. That'd be nice, maybe. Trump says Powell most likely to remain Fed chair. Surely, though, he's not going to be appointed to another term next year. His term expires in May. I would remove him in a heartbeat, but they say it would disturb the market and he gets out in 7 or 8 months and I'll put somebody else in. Okay, so, all right, yeah, so he's not going to appoint him to another term. The guy's going to be out in May 2026. Okay. All right. Okay. And then what else do we have here? Well, yes, he fired the labor the labor stats chief. In other words, the person who puts out the labor report every month, the first Friday of every month. And the reason is that the past months were revised downward about 90%. And President Trump feels that this was motivated politically because this guy was appointed by Biden. I think Biden, either Biden or Obama, Biden, right? Now, some people are saying, well, firing him though puts a sort of puts the credibility of U.S. economic data in doubt. Well, U.S. economic data was in doubt anyway, right? I mean, we know about inflation, that the official inflation figure is not what it actually is. That actually is considerably higher than what they actually tell us. And also the jobs figures, for example. And these are estimates, all right? And they put out a jobs figure, for example, they put out a jobs figure yesterday, Friday. They put out a jobs figure Friday. And then next month, they may revise it upward or downward. But in the case of this time, in terms of July and June, the jobs figures were very good. But then yesterday, they revised those figures down quite considerably. And so President Trump is now firing the guy who was responsible for that office. Order the removal of Bureau of Labor Statistics Commissioner Friday over the jobs numbers report that came out earlier in the day because we didn't believe the numbers, he told Newsmax, adding she was very suspect. Trump fired Erica McIntyre, who was appointed by former President Joe Biden after data showed employment growth was weaker than expected last month. In an exclusive interview, I think it's not so much the weaker than expected for July, but rather the drastic revision downward of the June and May figures, as I understand. We've had problems in the past with McIntyre. We had, you remember those wonderful results that were put out just before the election, and everybody said, where do they come from? Yeah, this is part of Washington. This is part of Washington. So I think President Trump wants to appoint his own person there. And, well, Biden got to appoint his own person there, so why not? Why not? And economic data is pretty suspect anyway. Not as much as China. I mean, China is completely sort of made up. And China will use this kind of thing as an excuse to say, well, you guys in America, you do it too, so why not us? But they do it far, far more egregiously. Excuse me, I have to keep taking water here. All right, let's see here. Senate delays August recess as Trump presses confirmation. So there are a lot of confirmations that still need to be done. Hundreds or if not thousands of confirmations need to be done. And the Senate is, I guess, going to at least delay their August vacation in order to get those done. Hope so. And let's see here. But let me see. Let me go back to Putin, actually. I have this other important article on Putin and nuclear weapons. That is that Putin is more likely to start a nuclear war than many are prepared to admit. An opinion piece here, opinion piece on, this is actually published on MSN. We've grown used to, let me expand this. We've grown used to blood-curdling nuclear threats from Russia's leadership, but this time Donald Trump has very publicly reacted to them by moving 2 nuclear-armed submarines closer to Russia. Remember, this is MSN, and MSN is very blatantly anti-Trump. But, we look at leftist publications too, because sometimes they give us sort of insights or information. Russia has primarily used a nuclear saber rattling as part of its information warfare to scare the West. Sadly, it has delivered results. Western states moved cautiously after Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, in part because of the Kremlin's nuclear threats. Trump's submarine move is a direct response to social media posts by Dmitry Medvedev, the former Russian president. Many Russians believe that Medvedev is a heavy drinker, and some have suggested that some of his posts were written while drunk. That could be true, or not. We don't know. Did not take a blood alcohol test after at the time that he was making these posts, so we have no way of knowing. His role within the Russian regime hierarchy is now as a snarling attack dog, hurling blood-curdling threats at the Kremlin's enemies. It is good that Trump is beginning to see through the Russian regime. He is clearly angry that his policy of appeasing the Kremlin hasn't worked, despite his extraordinary tactic of offering over the heads of the Ukrainians a peace deal that would have allowed Vladimir Putin to pay virtually no price for the appalling actions of his armies. It is perhaps not so good that Trump has made it clear that he is reacting directly to Medvedev's nuclear bluster. The Russian regime now knows that it is possible to goad the president into real-world actions if they can upset him enough online. They have spent years studying the president, and their understanding of human motivation is deeply researched. There is a risk that nuclear policy, which historically has been agonized over by experts due to its extraordinary importance and the terrible risks of getting it wrong, is now part of high-stakes trash talking on social media. While the risk that Putin will order the use of nuclear weapons is small, it is not non-existent. Ever since the Russian leader began his political and military conflict with Ukraine back in 2005 to force it into eventual unification with Russia, he has escalated crises when he has failed to achieve his aims. The Russian leader did so in 2014. 2014 would be Biden, Obama administration, right? Obama. The Russian leader did so in 2014 with Obama in the partial invasion of eastern Ukraine. And then in 2022, there will be Biden now with the full invasion. So there's a gap there, right? And that gap is what? That gap is Trump. Will he escalate again with nuclear weapons? This is a much speculated on secret nuclear theory in Russia called escalate to de-escalate, which is nuclear weapons are used to regain control of a conflict, forcing an enemy to surrender or face annihilation. Confidential Russian papers have suggested that a first stage might involve a demonstration strike, perhaps a one-off strike on water. The second would be the targeting of a low population site on land, potentially in an abandoned town or city. The third would be a deterrence demonstration on a potential military target, such as a transport hub. From there, nuclear use would escalate to multiple tactical nuclear strikes across a theater of operations. Putin has already weakened the grounds for using nuclear weapons. Russia's 2014 military doctrine gives two main grounds for using nuclear weapons, either in response to their use by others or when the existence of the Russian Federation is threatened. A more recent 2020 document allowed for a nuclear strike if Russia is facing an imminent nuclear attack, so preempting a preemptive strike. So if Russia would lose control of its arsenal via, for example, multiple conventional precision strikes, both are inherently dangerous. Twice in the Cold War, junior officers of then Soviet Union refused to react when technology or their superiors told them to prepare nuclear weapons. Their brave actions saved the world from a potentially catastrophic escalation. Last year, Putin lowered Russia's nuclear weapon threshold again, decreeing that an attack on Russia with conventional missile systems might justify a nuclear response, although Ukraine's infamous Spider's Web attack on his bomber fleet this June did not result in a nuclear response. Ukrainians have long argued that Russia's threats are a bluff to hide a failing army weighed down by 1 million casualties. What can be done? There are no good options, and this crisis make it more dangerous yet. Putin's regime is bent on war. There is no simpler way to say it. He doesn't want peace. I have been in Kiev this week discussing my book on Russia's new form of warfare, and the city is under regular and, on occasions, prolonged missile attack. Putin has strung Trump along. The best bet for the West is for Ukraine, with Allied support, especially in air defense to protect its resilient but suffering citizens, to fight Russia to a standstill and hopefully force a snarling Russian leader to end the war. Most of the alternatives don't bear thinking about. Okay. So he has a new book, The New Total War, and I don't see any other explanation of him, who he is. So he doesn't even want to talk about my option, which would be for the United States to abandon Ukraine, temporarily at least, and focus on China, and basically making a tactical retreat so that the United States is protecting Poland, Hungary, and the Baltic countries, the NATO countries, but not defending or not helping to defend Ukraine anymore. That's my alternative. But I guess Bob Seeley does not even want to think about that. Okay, he doesn't want to bear thinking about that. Okay. All right, so yes, we'll see how this finally works out. But really, Biden got us into a huge mess, didn't he? With his weak leadership. Um, uh, Meanwhile, I see here that let's see here. Let me bring this down. Ukraine has made a huge attack on Russia just recently in the last few hours, I guess. Ukraine initiated a bold series of strikes targeting oil refineries, defense factories, a military airfield, and radar installations early Saturday morning. These attacks followed Donald Trump's decision to position nuclear submarines near Russia. At dawn, a massive fireball explosion rocked the very long name oil refinery in the Samara region, creating a mushroom cloud that soared into the sky. This facility provides aviation fuel for Russian combat planes, which have been implicated in attacks on Ukrainian civilians. And here, another significant refinery in Ryazan, vital for fuel supplies to Moscow, was engulfed in flames as well. And a major hit was reported on a Russian air defense radar manufacturer near Feodosia in Crimea under Putin's control. The site is known for its large balls covering radio technical stations, one comparable to a 9-story building. And so forth and so on. Okay. Here, MSN describing Trump as former president. That's how much they hate him. That's how much they hate him. And who wrote this? Who wrote this? Former president? Former President Trump weighed in, describing Putin as a tough cookie while criticizing the Russian leader. So if Trump is not president of the United States now, according to MSN, who is? These people. Former and current president. All right, let's see here. Okay, that was a pro-Ukraine story. Anti-Trump, not even calling President Trump by his correct title. Boy. You know, PBS shut down its operations. Let me see if I can get that story. The Public Broadcasting Corporation, not PBS, the station, the Public Broadcasting Corporation. I wonder if MSN is going to be next with this kind of, it's kind of a blatant violation of journalistic ethics. Here we go. Yeah. This is a statement by the head of that organization. I don't need to go into that. I just want you to see the headline. A statement from Catherine Mayer, NPR president and CEO, National Public Radio president and CEO, on closure of corporation for public broadcasting. And this has been a hugely leftist, and elitist, globalist. Get all your ists out there. And it was funded by the government. And if you watched it, I've watched it a few times in my life, and they'll say, okay, this program was sponsored by the Ford Foundation or the Carnegie Foundation or this foundation or that foundation. So they're getting money from various leftist globalist foundations as well. And I think it will not be missed. It's been a globalist propaganda operation for a long time, leftist globalist propaganda operation. And I think it will not be missed at all. The elitists will miss it. They can get their news from someplace else, I'm sure. Okay, let's look at the headlines again on the Newsmax. Okay, all right. Let's see here. Folks, Tom Homan, illegals reduce U.S. workers' wages. Okay, well, that's not even news. We know that. Myron Donalds, stop lawmaker trading but allow brokers. I see. So right now they're working to pass a law that will make it illegal for members of Congress, House, and Senate to buy and sell stocks. I think that's the idea. And of course, they're calling it the Pelosi bill because Nancy Pelosi really went overboard in using her position as a member of Congress to buy and sell stocks with the insider information that she has. And under current law, it's completely legal. They have written the law so that, of course, if you or I were to do insider trading, we would go to jail in a heartbeat. But they have written the law so as to exempt themselves. I mean, can you believe it? Can you believe it? And so a lot of people have done this, and a lot of people get rich after they become members of Congress. It's not just Pelosi, but Pelosi is the most egregious example of this. And actually, it's the White House spokesperson was pointing out that her portfolio in 2024 was far better than Warren Buffett. She had a far better year than Warren Buffett. And she actually beat all of the hedge funds, right? She is the master trader. Warren Buffett is not the master trader. It's Nancy Pelosi. She is the master trader because she uses insider information blatantly. She doesn't even hide it. It's blatant. And so now they're passing a law to try and set that right. Of course, why was this done a long time ago? Well, because Republicans have been doing the same thing. It's really quite astonishing that this kind of thing has been going on all this time. And now, see, the ex-Trump prosecutor, Jack Smith, is going to be investigated. Okay, here. Funding cuts for shutdown of public broadcasting corporation. Well, let's take a look at this one. The Corporation for Public Broadcasting will shut down its operations after the loss of federal funding, the nonprofit said on Friday, ending the decades of support for local TV and radio stations that have relied on its grants. And yeah, there are each sort of area, each city has its own NPR or public Center or Senate Corporation for Public Broadcasting Station, and those stations will probably have to be shut down unless they can get other private funding, because they are nonprofit. And there's no law that says that they have to be funded by the government. You know, Ford Foundation, Carnegie Foundation, those guys can ramp it up and do so. No law against that. But taxpayer dollars will not be going into them anymore. The Republican-controlled U.S. House of Representatives passed a $9 billion funding cut to public media and foreign aid last month. This includes $1.1 billion for Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which distributes funding to news outlets, National Public Radio, and Public Broadcasting Service. CPB informed its employees that the majority of its staff will be let go as of September end, except a small transition team that will remain through January 2026 to ensure closeout of operations. Created by U.S. Congress in 1967, 67 would be who? That would be LBJ, right? That would be Johnson, a Democrat, right? Of course. The CPB distributed more than $500 million annually to PBS, NPR, and more than 1,500 locally operated public radio and television stations. And this is a Globalist or Reuters article. Yeah. Newsmax seems to rely a lot on Reuters, even though, well, I guess, you know, you got to get your news from somewhere, I suppose. Yeah, so 1967. What were they thinking? 1967 was when there was a lot of, or the opposition against the Vietnam War was growing. And I think what the government was hoping would happen would be that NPR would sort of be more of a government mouthpiece type of situation to help the government. But of course, that failed. And it was, well, you know, and if you're receiving money from Ford or Carnegie or Rockefeller Foundation or these types of places, then you're going to be globalist, because that's what they demand, and you have to do what your donors want you to do. So yeah, maybe something else can replace it sometime at some point, but you know, the whole idea of the government owning or the government supporting news operations, that should be suspect in a country like the United States. The government's not supposed to be doing that. All right, so now the reporters will have to get their money from someplace else. Okay. All right, let's see. Oh, I closed out to Newsmax, didn't I? Okay, well, let's go to Breitbart. Trump vindicated by jobs slump. Powell humiliated. Okay, so Trump is angry about the low jobs number that came out yesterday. What was it, 73,000 or something like that? Much less than expected. But Breitbart is actually saying, "Oh, it's good. It's good. See, Trump was right." And you could say that Powell should have been lowering rates so as to increase the money supply and allow for companies to spend more money on hiring new workers so that the job numbers would have held up. That's the argument that Breitbart is trying to put forward. But apparently President Trump doesn't agree with it. And this is one, you know, this is an example of where sometimes President Trump's policies are kind of contradictory, right? In this case, maybe he should be saying, "I told you so" about the low jobs numbers. But instead he's saying, "Oh, the people who put out the jobs numbers are bad. They're appointed by Biden. So therefore I'm going to fire them. The true jobs numbers is much higher." So in that sense, then Powell would say, "Well, I told you so." You know, I told you so. You admit that the actual job market is much better than what the Treasury Department is putting out. The Bureau of Labor Statistics is putting out, or not Treasury Department, Labor Department. So President Trump is kind of contradicting himself here. You know, it's the same thing where he's saying, "I want the dollar to be the supreme currency in the world," but then he's also instituting policies that drive down the dollar. So, where are we going? I don't know. Yeah. What are we doing? Of course, now, you know, the dollar right now is back above 100, or at least it was last time I checked on the index. Shall we check that index? But for short term, I think I mentioned this yesterday, didn't I? That well, long term is expected to continue to go down. The XY, yeah, it's back below 100 now. Yeah. So sometimes I kind of wonder about Trump. But hey, listen, all will be forgiven. All will be forgiven if he just brings down the CCP. Not Xi Jinping. Let's make sure we understand the distinction here, okay? If Xi Jinping is replaced, that's not a victory for God's providence. Because then the CCP will come out and say, see, yeah, we can reform. Look, we put in a new guy. He's going to be better. And this is the trap of communism, actually. And I was in this trap for a while. I took a course in college on the history of the Chinese Communist Party. And I also took a course where we read Karl Marx's book, Das Kapital, in English, of course. And my conclusion was, yeah, it's a good system, but you just have to have the right people in it. And this is the trap that communism has. Many people fall into it. Yeah, okay, it didn't work in the Soviet Union, but that's because they had the wrong people, right? And now in China, they have the right people, or maybe they don't. Maybe the next team that comes in, maybe they'll be the right people, or Cuba or Venezuela or someplace. Surely they're going to get the right people. No, it's not. So all will be forgiven, President Trump, if you just bring down the Chinese Communist Party, as President Reagan brought down the Soviet Communist Party, with, of course, Father helping him and doing the heavy lifting there in the background. But the President of the United States certainly has a big chunk of 5%, big responsibility there. Yeah. Okay. All right, let's see. So Breitbart is trying to, I'm not sure what they're trying to do. they're going against President Trump. And here, why Powell's legacy is on the line with John Carney. Okay. Poor jobs. I point directly at the Fed. Okay. And by the way, as a result of that, the U.S. bonds, let's see, bond yields went down, which is what President Trump wants. Oops, not that. Okay. And right now the bond is at 4.22. The 10 years at 4.22, which is much lower than what it's been. It's been about 4.4, 4.5, something like that for a long time. And right now the 2-year is also down, and the 2-year. Okay. So all the U.S. bonds the yields are down quite a bit as a result of, or immediately following this jobs report. So President Trump could be using this to his advantage, but he's not. Okay. All right, let's see here. What else do we have here? Bitter Jon Stewart ridicules Jay Leno, explains Gutfield's success. Blumenthal, Senate should probe Trump firing labor statistics commissioner. Okay, and then Senate should probe. Okay, well, the same as our story there. And Klobuchar says Dems polling low because of Trump's chaos and corruption. How do you figure that? One would think that Democrats' polling would be high if people are fed up with Trump's chaos and corruption, but I don't know. Apparently, something's not. The logic isn't quite working there, is it? Let's see here. Al Sharpton, Trump has compromised the integrity of the Smithsonian. Al Sharpton's not one to be talking about integrity, that's for sure. But anyway, Dem-led states sue Trump admin over efforts to defund Planned Parenthood. Okay, well, that's going through the courts. And J.D. Vance mocks Dems calling Sydney Sweeney Nazi over American Eagle ad. Yeah, I think there was a good story on what's that guy's name? Anyway, what's that guy's name? The British guy. He had a good video on this on YouTube, which I'd like to just point out just briefly. Yes, I can't find them. I guess I can't find them. Okay, give up. All right. Anyway, yeah. So it's a fashion thing. It's we don't really cover fashion here. Fluoride helping or hurting us. This is a sponsored story, but yeah, that's something that a lot of people are worried about. And now Trump has suspended $200 million in research funding to UCLA. All right. Okay. Islamic Center sends support letter for child rapists during sentencing. Putin criminalizes online searches for extremist content. Okay. World Jewish Congress hails Arab League's moral clarity and historic call to disarm Hamas. So yeah, we talked about this yesterday, right? So France and UK and Canada don't understand, but the other Arab countries or the Arab countries understand that Hamas is a bad actor and they need to be shut down. Okay. All right, so let's look at the Epoch Times, see what they're up to here. And Trump sets new tariff, extends deadline. What to know? Yeah. They also came up with a tariff for South Korea, and apparently a lot of these agreements are actually not written down on paper. South Korea is saying that there was actually no written document exchanged or signed, and Japan, I think, is also saying the same thing. And the problem is that the Korean negotiators are saying, "Oh, look, we held our ground on rice and beef. So no more American rice other than what we're already importing. No more American rice, no more American beef other than what we're already importing. We really held our ground." But then the White House spokesperson comes out and says, "Oh, now the Korea has opened its markets to American agricultural goods, including rice." And Koreans say, "What?" Because rice is also a very big thing here as well. It's hard for people in America to understand the way that rice is viewed in Asian countries, but also from the point of view of food security, right? If Korea becomes dependent on foreign rice and something happens, maybe China shuts down all the sea lanes into Korea, for example, then what's going to happen? You cannot just produce rice overnight. It takes a long time, at least a year. And probably if you stop growing rice, then in fields where you stop growing rice, it probably take at least a year, maybe more, longer than that to start growing again. So there's an aspect of food security. There's also an aspect of the the rural vote, political aspect of it as well. And if the farmers in Korea are not going to grow rice, then what are they going to do? Actually, no, the farmers in the area of the Suncheon Palace are famous for a particular crop, cucumbers. Yes, they are very famous for cucumbers. And sometime back, when was that? My wife and I were taking a walk around, and the village people were in their greenhouses harvesting their cucumbers. And we walked by, and they said, "Oh, they happened to come out of the greenhouse. Said, oh, here, take some." And they gave us a whole bunch of cucumbers, which we took back, and they were very delicious. Anyway, so in Japan too, there's been a lot of shifting away from rice farming, partly because of the imports from the U.S., but also partly because uh, the Japanese people are just eating less rice and more bread and other things, other sort of products. In other words, the sort of the taste of the palate of the Japanese and of the Koreans as well is changing. The Japanese more than Koreans probably. It used to be when I was a child, you would go around Japan and every single, even if there was a tiny bit of land, maybe a quarter of a land that you wouldn't expect, but it would all be they would be planting rice on that piece of land. But now that's not the case anymore, and you see a lot of open fields where nothing is being planted, where it's just where grass is just being allowed to grow. But there is a big concern, and so the White House spokesperson's statement that, oh yes, Korea has opened up its rice market, has caused something of a furor in South Korea, and I think. But you see, the problem is that there's nothing written down. Neither side. So I have to see what comes. But I think South Korea is certainly not going to uh, allow American rice to come in to a greater extent than what it already is. I don't think. But maybe there'll be negotiations after the negotiation. And here, so Trump is, well, the U.S. now is. It's very interesting what Trump has done. I don't think this kind of thing has ever been done before, where a new president comes in and says, "Okay, we're going to have a new tariff system," and so forth. And what's this? What is this? Okay. The yellow ones are new rate. Canada, I think, still has 35%, right? And then the blue ones are trade deal. And China and Mexico, future deadline. Mexico has a 90-day reprieve, I guess. And China, I think in about 10 days, they have a deadline coming up. And we have a deal with New Zealand as well. New rate with New Zealand. Australia is blank for some reason. And most African countries are blank. And most South American countries are blank. All right. Plunder of Ghana's gold by Chinese criminals continues, authorities say. Yeah. It's Africa. Oh boy. At some point, Africa has got to start receiving some blessing from God. And it comes down to leadership, I think. I've talked about my experience in Nigeria when Father was there, and there was a conference held in conjunction with Father's visit, and there was a Japanese presenter, making a presentation on how Africans should be farming their land. And after the presentation, a member of the audience stood up and said, "Hey, you know what? Our ancestors have been farming this land for centuries. We don't need anyone to come here and tell us how to farm our land. What we need are good leaders." And I think that probably that was probably true. So why so many bad leaders then? Well, that's hard to answer that, but I think certainly the colonial past must have a lot to do with it. And the way that the colonial powers just sort of basically arbitrarily drew the boundaries of their colonies and later on the nations in Africa. Uh, Certainly, Africa is a place where getting rid of international boundaries, which is what Father has called for, would help things along a lot, right? Um, anyway, we'll have to see how this develops, but at some point in history, Africa has got to uh, God's blessing has got to be pouring down on Africa because they've been through so much, so much. All right, you know, for many reasons, both internal and external, right? Both internal and external. All right, I gotta go now. Tomorrow's Sunday. I will see you on Monday, and then we will see what happens over the weekend. God bless God's